Алексей Korenev, я кандидат педагогических наук, доцент факультета иностранных языков и регионоведения М.В. Ломоносова, председатель Совета молодых ученых своего факультета, поэтому на Ломоносове я во многих ролях, в роли организатора, в роли выступающего, и вот в этом году еще в особой для себя роли я в первый раз буду выступать в зале «Трансформере», и говорить я буду об обратной связи, о фидбэке, о том, как обратная связь может помогать нам лучше работать, лучше учиться и лучше жить в целом. Hello everyone. As I have already been introduced, I will not repeat that. My name is Alexey Korenev. I work at the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Area Studies at Moscow University. And my research group does an investigation of how teachers communicate with their students and how this communication can be done more efficiently. It's the first time that I'm presenting in this very room, even though I have studied at Moscow University, I graduated from Moscow University, I did my PhD at Moscow University, and after that I've been working at Moscow University for already almost 10 years. Nevertheless, this is the first time I'm here, so this is a new experience for me. I'll need to talk to all of you at the same time, so I'll be turning, coming to you and going away from you. Please bear with me. And I hope at some point I will get my presentation started, even though I'm not sure when exactly this is going to happen. So let me use this particular point of time to tell you a story that happened to me yesterday. As I'm in charge of organizing the conference at my own faculty, yesterday was an extremely busy day. I was running around, carrying materials, water, programs, talking to people, very busy. Like we received 600 proposals this year, and this was craziness. So I was running around, and at some point at the entrance, I see a colleague, a senior colleague, deputy head of my department coming in, and I say hello. As I thought, I said hello, ran past her, started doing business as usual. After that, at some point of the day, I come to the department, and there is the same colleague sitting there. So I thought I've already said hello. I was once again very busy running around, and I went out of the door doing some other stuff. And when I entered the department for the third time, she asked me right away, like, Alexey, is there a problem? Why is it the third time you're not saying hello to me? And at that point of time, of course I apologized. Of course I explained that the reason is that I thought I had said hello the first time we met, and that was the reason why I did not say hello again. And then the second time, I didn't hear her say hello. Obviously, I would have replied if I had heard. And the third time, I had to explain. But then I said, thank you very much for saying that to me today, because I will use this particular case as an example tomorrow when I'm going to talk about feedback. Because just imagine for a second what could have happened if she had not spoken to me. Like, she would have thought, okay, maybe he's too arrogant, maybe he's too important right now to say hello to me. And this is a person who is important to me. She's important to me on a professional level because she's the deputy head of my department. She's important to me at a personal level because she's one of the people who taught me. Imagine what would have happened if she has held the grudge, if she thought, okay, for some reason, he didn't want to say hello to me. If this communication between the two of us had not happened, I might have had already have a completely different relationship with a colleague of mine and with a person who is important for me. That is why feedback is important. And there are many different ways in which feedback is important. Feedback can be very important in education. Feedback can be very important in management, in how we work together. And feedback can generally improve the quality of life. I will be giving you some examples today. We'll see if you agree with me at the end of my talk. Can you guess who was the first person to mention feedback somehow? Like this is the person who invented like pretty much 60% of everything that exists in research. And he was also the first person to indirectly talk about feedback. He was talking about the education of builders and lyre players, and he mentioned that the feedback that people receive from their teachers basically plays the crucial role in whether they become advanced builders or lyre players or bad lyre players and builders? Can you guess the name? We can run it as a competition between 3 parts of the room. I will be awarding points. Can you guess the name of the person? The person who invented 60% of all the, I would say like 60% is not research-based, is just my rough estimation of research knowledge that we have, particularly in humanities. Names? Names? Say again? Da Vinci earlier, but good try. Okay. And yeah, who said Aristotle? The same person. 1 point awarded to the team on my left. Well done. You have just earned a point for your sector. Yes, this was Aristotle. Aristotle was the first person to talk about the importance of feedback in education. And if we talk about feedback more on a more serious level, then probably the first study of feedback and its relation to education was that by Thorndike, who looked at different effects that positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and lack of reinforcement can have on human learning. And as you might guess, if we get some positive reinforcement, such as candy or a point, we are more inclined to repeat the action. We are more inclined to behave in the way that earns us positive reinforcement. If we get negative reinforcement, we are discouraged from repeating the action. So this very basic effect on, of education, of feedback on education was discovered at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, if we talk about feedback in modern psychology, then one particularly important study was the still face experiment done in Harvard. There, the same mother would first come and interact with her child, like smile and say, and then she would come with a still face. And she would just look at her child and see what happened. Can you guess what happens to the child if he sees his or her mom with a still face in front of them? Can you guess? What would you do if you were a child and you saw your mom giving you no emotion whatsoever? Worrying, crying. Yeah, that's natural human reaction to the lack of feedback. The thing is that just throughout our development in the human world, we have learned out of receiving feedback, right? So now we don't start crying if we receive no feedback, we just carry on. When we were children, feedback played a crucial role in our development. It shaped our reactions, and that is how we were educated. That's how we learned. That's why for a child, if a child does not receive any feedback from their parent, most natural reaction is that they start to cry. A newer study done at University College London is the study around epistemic trust. Epistemic trust is a unique relationship between a child and his or her primary caregiver. Primary caregiver can be their mother, father, grandmother, nanny. That shapes the way we interact with people in the future. So basically, imagine the same knowledge to be given to you by your mother or your father and to be given to you by somebody you do not know. Obviously, you are going to trust in a ordinary situation, you would trust your parent way more. And this is what epistemic trust does. We trust the source, we trust the person, and we prescribe certain social value to the knowledge that we receive. So this social knowledge, as they have proven through research, plays a very important role in whether we can apply the knowledge that we receive through feedback in situations different from the one where we learned it. Imagine the following situation. You study for an exam, burn late night oil, learn a lot of stuff, and then you go to the exam and you perform pretty well because you have learned, right? So in the exam situation, you are ready to reproduce the knowledge. You perform well, you get your A star, 5, 12, whatever your system is, and you're happy. And then in 2 weeks, you do not remember anything from what you have learned. And if you're asked to apply this knowledge in a different situation, you can't because you don't remember. This is an example of how learning can be gained without epistemic trust. On the other hand, imagine that you did not revise for the test. You did not revise, you come to the test, you get your exam card, you read the question, and then you don't have a clue. You feel lost. But then you start remembering an example that the teacher or the lecturer was giving, what he looked like when he did it, or she looked like when she did it. And then you suddenly start remembering things. And yes, this is not going to be 100% what was written in the book, but overall, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. This is how epistemic trust works. And what's more, epistemic trust to the source can also lead us into believing things. And that's the danger of epistemic trust, because through epistemic trust, we can teach people things that are not necessarily true. And this is largely exercised, for instance, in propaganda. And finally, feedback is related to self-perception. Because now I am conducting this talk. I'm doing the talk, I'm going around looking at you people. And in my head, when I was preparing yesterday, I had this ideal conception of how it would go, right? A room full of people, everybody smiling and listening and eager to learn about feedback. And now I'm comparing your reaction to my ideal, and this influences my communicative behavior. I can decide to speak slowly or to speak faster. I can decide to give you an example. And right now I have decided to skip the video because I thought that we must move on to the part that might be more relevant, and also because of the time limits. A problem with education is that very often we give and receive tasks, there is no reporting on the result, we get the mark, and that's it. And if you think, for example, of an essay that you have written in one of your courses, you have spent an enormous amount of time writing this essay. Your lecturer has spent a lot of time reading the essay. Now, jointly, this can be 1 hour of time or 1 hour and a half. What use is this essay if the only feedback that we receive through it is a mark 5, 4, 3, 10, 98%. If this is the only learning outcome that we get out of this essay, I personally feel like to some extent, the time of the lecturer, the time of the student has been wasted to some extent. That is why feedback and the attention given to feedback in education largely comes in from the shift of paradigm in assessment. Because in the past, before the 1990s all around the world, we were mainly talking about assessment of learning. Well, in some university lecture rooms and in some countries, we still are talking about assessment of learning. But globally, the paradigm is shifting. Now, can you make that shift? Change one word in this phrase so that this whole phrase would make more sense in terms of how we can help people learn. So in the past, it was assessment of learning, and now it is... Say again? Say 4? Oh, that's the second point for the people on my left. Assessment for learning. Exactly. The shift is that now, whenever we're talking about assessment, no matter where this assessment takes place, we're not talking about purely assessment of learning. We're talking about assessment for learning, which means whatever you decide to do in terms of assessment in your classroom, it has to help people learn in some way. Otherwise, as teachers, you are not doing your job properly, because your job is to educate people, and therefore the paradigm is shifting towards assessment for learning. And even with large-scale tests such as state exams, we are talking about the washback effect of those tests on how people learn. Feedback in education can have many roles, and the first one that I've already mentioned is self-perception. So if you see the Superman child standing there, here I'm trying to illustrate that for your self-perception and for the self-perception of your students, it's tremendously important to be given feedback. The second picture that I have illustrates that feedback is also a learning mechanism. Feedback is a way to show a person the difference or the correspondence of a certain performance with the ideal result, and to show how this result can be achieved. So feedback instructs the person on how this person can develop in terms of fulfilling their in terms of completing their educational aims and goals. The third one with 3 arrows is about continuous improvement. Because, I mean, we are all of us lecturers or teachers in the classroom who do not usually get a lot of feedback. And when this happens, like, okay, you do this course this year and then next year, and then at some point of time, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And here I would like to tell you another story that my lecturer in education told me when I was a student. She spoke about the very early 1990s in Russia, and some lecturer or instructor, pretty young, from the British Council, came to a school in Moscow and attended an English language lesson there. So he spent some time there, and he decided to give some feedback to the teacher at the end of the lesson. And despite the fact that he tried to do it in a very careful way, the teacher was deeply offended, and at the end she told him, "Who are you to tell me what to do? I've got 40 years of experience." And at that point, that visitor, he said a genius phrase. He gave her a genius phrase. He said, "Is it 40 years of experience, or is it 1 year experience repeated 40 times?" So in order for us not to repeat 1 year experience 40 times, we must collect feedback. We must get feedback from our students. And then again, if the system doesn't have the instruments for receiving regular feedback, it's our role as teachers to find a way to get this feedback from our students, probably at the end of the course, after the exam, probably in an anonymous manner and online. There are many ways. And finally, education for many people is a huge investment project. If you think about your children, if you have children of your own, you probably invest a lot of money into their education, right? A lot of money, a lot of time. It's basically a huge investment project. Or if you are students, then probably your parents did or are still doing this. And then if you think about this investment project, it's pretty shaky. You get very little information about your investment. You are not certain about the outcomes of your investment. And that's scary, isn't it? If you are investing money and you're not sure about the result, you don't know how your project is doing. That is why it's very important to give regular feedback to all the stakeholders, not just to the students, not just to the teachers, but pretty often also to the parents. Here are the 5 necessary qualities of feedback in education. And these are the first letters, so I want you to guess what the adjectives that describe good feedback in education are. You can just shout the words that come to your mind. There are 5 adjectives, and they start with P, G, S, C, and U. Who said personal? Personal. Okay, 1 point to this corner. Yes, the first one is personal or personalized. Whenever I give feedback to the whole group, basically people with the highest self-esteem, they say, yes, he said we are the best sector of the room because I answered the question 3 times, or because I was following and I was smiling. Yeah, that is why he said we are the best sector in terms of listening to this presentation. Or that's why she said, well done us. But a way more efficient way of giving feedback is when I talk to this very person who gave me 2 answers. Can you tell me your name, please? Andre. If I talk to Andre and say, Andre, thank you very much for answering my questions. You know, if you ever find yourself in this place and people do not answer your questions, very scary, right? So thank you very much for helping me out, right? This way, feedback works way better because it's personalized. Okay. G, any idea?
Genius.
Generous. There was genuine from this sector, but I have my student who completed a course on professional communication and teaching in here. So if you guys have heard what she's just said, have you heard? What was the word that she said? Genuine. Very well. I'm still going to afford the second point to this sector, so that it's 2-2. Come on, guys, pull yourselves together, right? Genuine. Because at the beginning of feedback in education, there was the whole generation of teachers who was trained to give feedback this way. Well done, amazing, beautiful, very well, great. And also people were taught about the frameworks of giving feedback, such as positive, negative, positive. And being trained that way, I had been using positive, negative, positive for 3 years. Guess what happened? My students figured that out about me. And at some point, they started to ignore the first part because they said, okay, he writes this positive stuff just because he has to, and started to read only the negative part. And that's how they perceived my feedback. And also, they looked at my feedback as something like it's something that I have to do, simply because it's part of my job. Like I am a feedback giving machine. So it has to be genuine. It has to be your communication with your student. It has to be a unique interaction. S. Can anybody guess what S? Systematic, sociable, all good guesses. Structured. Sometimes can be structured, sometimes it doesn't have to be structured, because it depends on how you communicate with a person. If a person likes structure, then you would give this person more structured feedback. If this person likes more general and unstructured feedback, then probably you would. This refers to what exactly feedback refers to. So S goes for specific, right? S. Thorndike has pointed out as early as the 1930s, good feedback is specific. It's clear what you are being praised for. It's clear what you need to improve. And this leads us to the C. And the C is that good feedback has to be creative? Not so sure. Concrete, that's specific. That's specific in other words. But look, have you ever received essay comments such as not good, or primitive, or bad? Yeah, this is critical, but is it helpful in terms of learning? Or somebody comes to me and says, Alex, honestly, this was not the best presentation that you've ever had. I'd say thank you. Constructive, thank you very much. Yes, it has to be constructive. It must be clear what exactly do I need to do to get better. Otherwise, where are the stairs? Where are the learning goals? Constructive. You need to tell your students how they can improve. And the last one is understood. Because very often we give feedback and the message that the person gets is totally different from what we wanted to say. So a very good strategy is to double check whether the message received is the same as the message that we wanted to send. And if our feedback is specific, constructive, genuine, personalized, and understood, then we will be moving from feedback to, can you guess? From feedback to feed forward. Another point for this sector, 3-2. Feed forward. Right? When whatever feedback we give helps people to make to do the next step, to progress in their learning. So from feedback, we are moving to feed forward. And this is pretty much all about the most important qualities of feedback in education. Now in management, people have also figured out that feedback is very important. And then when they conducted studies into how much feedback people actually receive, Zenger and Folkman had a study with 8,000 managers, and they said that 44% said it was stressful to give feedback, and about 1/5 did not give feedback at all. And this was a study conducted in the United States. This was not a study conducted in Russia or in Japan, where because of some cultural norms, the amount of feedback can be even less. So there is this problem. And another problem is that at work, sometimes we see feedback as a social threat. Even our body reacts to it as to a social threat. If you have ever received feedback in public, your face can turn red, your breath can, your breathing accelerates. So it's basically the same fight or flight response that our ancestors had when they saw a saber-toothed tiger. The reaction to feedback is in a way similar. And then people started to come up with elaborate schemes of how to give and receive feedback at workplace, how to design feedback-oriented workplaces. And one of the models, that's just one of them, is called radical candor. Radical candor, or radical honesty, is a system that looks at feedback on two scales. One of them is how much you care personally about the people you're working with, and on the other hand, about to what extent are you able to challenge them directly. And there are 4 areas. The first one, where you do care personally, but you are not ready to challenge directly, is it's called ruinous empathy. Because you have a lot of empathy, and it's ruining you and the people you're working with. It doesn't help you develop. Ruinous empathy is if somebody came to me right after this lecture and said, Alexey Alexandrovich, thank you very much. Very beautiful lecture. I liked it totally. Nothing to improve. Ideal. Right? That's ruinous empathy. Person is obviously caring about me, doesn't want to upset me. But what learning do I get from this feedback? Very little. Now, the opposite of ruinous empathy is when you challenge directly, but you don't care about the people you are talking to. It's like, this was so unprofessional, like, you know, and it was so long, I could hardly sit there till the end of the talk. This was probably the worst talk I have ever been to. Right? You challenge directly, and yes, and clean your shoes, please. Even though this was already some constructive element, where you challenge directly, but you don't care about the person you're giving feedback to. Similar to this is manipulative insincerity. Manipulative insincerity is when you say very interesting to the person, or you don't say anything to the person who delivered the talk, but then you talk to another colleague and say, this was the worst talk that I've ever had. So here you are manipulating people around you and you don't care about them. The feedback that is suggested instead is radical candor, when you talk with people and when you tell them where you think they can improve and what you think they are doing well. And if you develop an environment where people can be honest with each other, and when people are not afraid to give feedback to each other, you will see a huge potential for learning. And you will see a lot of development in your workplace. Now, the problem is that our reaction to feedback, especially to negative feedback, is somehow similar to the grief circle, especially if you receive negative feedback. The first reaction is shock and denial, like, this couldn't have just happened to me, no. Then you start bargaining. You say, okay, she said so because she was in a bad mood. It wasn't because of my talk, it was because she was in a bad mood. She had to run home, and that's why she said so. Then anger. How could she? Who is she to tell me that? Which is also with elements of denial, right? Where you deny the feedback that you have just received. After that, you move to guilt, grief, and depression, which is like, I'm not a good presenter. I shouldn't have said yes when they invited me in the first place. I should probably go and just do something different. And then at some point, you adjust yourself. You say, okay, this was probably not the best lecture that I've ever had because of this and that. But now I know what I can improve, and you're improving. And there is advice to help you come over this circle of grief. The first one, never give negative feedback publicly, right? If you care about the people you are giving feedback to, then you should know that nobody likes to be embarrassed in public, right? So do not give negative feedback in public. Be specific and constructive. We know this from linguistics. One of the essential qualities of most complaints is that they are general. You never clean up in the kitchen after you have finished breakfast? Is it really never? Or do I maybe sometimes clean up? A necessary quality of all complaints is that they are very general. Use it at home. You will see that most often, whenever somebody is complaining, complaints are very general. When you receive feedback, especially negative feedback, stop your first reaction. Remember this encounter with the saber-toothed tiger growing in you, and try to stop your first reaction. Try to stop your first response, because then if you show it, people will be discouraged from giving you negative feedback, and then at some point you will stop developing, which is not a good thing for all of us. Then remember the benefits. At this point, tell you about the benefits. Tell yourself about the benefits of receiving feedback. Say that, okay, this person is caring about me, or probably this person is not caring about me, but they are giving me feedback right now, and I can learn from this feedback. So let me focus on the benefits. What can I learn from this feedback? Say thank you, which will encourage people to give you more feedback next time. And ask questions to deconstruct feedback. So if somebody comes to me and says, this was not the best lecture that you have ever had, I'll start asking questions. So was it the length? Was it the slides? Was it me talking too much? What was the problem with the lecture? Deconstruct it, because then you will get particular learning advice from the person. And taking it at a broader level, thinking about your life in general, remember that communication helps to develop. And whenever you want to give people feedback, you can also use a very useful communication trick called the I statement, saying, like, I was following your slides and I was lost when you had the slide with a lot of text. I couldn't follow. Right? This way you're not saying that your slides are bad. You're not saying that you always have a lot of text on your slides. You're saying that I could not follow at this point of time. And do give feedback. Whenever you have a choice, whenever you have a chance, give feedback. Because another question that I constantly ask people whenever I speak about feedback, at the beginning of my talk, I very often ask them to think about the teacher who was important to them. A person they learned a lot from, a very important teacher. And then you think about that teacher, and then if you think about the feedback that you received from this teacher, you'd probably see that this teacher is probably the one who gave you some or a lot of feedback. Could have been positive or negative. But then the next question that I ask those people is, did you get a chance to say thank you and to give feedback to that teacher? Did you get a chance to tell that teacher that he or she really shaped you as a professional or as a student or as a person? Did you use this opportunity? Did you give them feedback? And very often the answer is no. Now, in this profession, as well as in many other professions, getting feedback, receiving feedback is very important for people on the emotional level. Another concept that goes in line with feedback is authoritative parenting. You can read more about that, but basically it says that whenever we give our children feedback, they are learning, they are developing. And here you would probably need to stop the inner monster inside of you saying that it's never too good or it's always not good enough, and give them honest feedback on their particular actions, right? Not telling them that you do not behave well at all, but saying that, in this situation, when you hit another boy, you were not behaving well because that hurt. Giving them particular useful feedback. Orientation, feedback helps us, and getting feedback from people helps us to see where we are in this life, how well we are doing things, and where we can improve. And feedback can influence our self-perception. Because like I said, if you get no feedback, especially in education, where you work with people, not seeing how socially important your work is will slowly burn you out. So if you want to avoid it, make sure that you organize elements in your courses where you give and receive feedback. Overall, looking at all of those points, I think that maybe I'm an idealist, but I think if we all start giving each other a little more feedback, then at some point, maybe in 20 years, maybe in 50 years, we will be living in a totally different society where people help each other develop through specific, personalized, genuine, caring feedback. Thank you very much for your attention.